Welcome back, Left Reckoning patrons. It is always lovely to have y'all here in the audience. My name is David, and I'm joined as always by my good friend and comrade Matt Leck. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing pretty good, David.
It's been a little up and down this week. I never know which one we're going to get, but we got a fun
tense,
one.
Yeah,
it's a little tense. Well, don't worry. We have some of the smartest minds in the country trying to figure out a way out of this hell world that we're in. I do love it sometimes to see what happens when centrists and liberals get their thinking caps on and come up with big ideas. We got a new one for you. This is straight from the New York Times, the New York Times editorial board. Which has a pretty exciting and novel idea in American politics, one I have never heard before. We're going to do a reading series on it. Let me pop this up. The piece in the New York Times came out last week, and it is titled, "America Still Has a Political Center. Moving to the center is the way to win." So new idea. Don't run to the left. Start running to the right. And then you will start winning elections. It's a very exciting idea. I think it will be very promising for the Democratic Party. I haven't heard anything like this before in my decade plus covering American politics.
Yeah, but what's happening is a subtle redefinition. I would just include people into what centrism means. Because back when I was in sort of high school or college and learning about politics and these labels for the first time, I remember hearing a lot of people define themselves as, I'm socially liberal and fiscally conservative. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, you don't hear so much. That's an old-fashioned kind of term. People don't say that so much anymore.
No, and, it is funny. I mean, this has been the kind of rebranding project, I think, of many people, of that kind of political persuasion since Kamala Harris's loss. Basically like the progressives and the crazy leftist socialists made the party too woke. And now we gotta, de-wokeify, which I'm not going to let them off the hook here. Let's remember that this entire kind of like hyper, attachment, to like identity politics, to like a very, very kind of like militant, let's call it wokeism or whatever. The very corporate kind of Hillary Clinton version of it, Kamala Harris version of it. Mm-hmm. That was trotted out and developed by the right wing of the Democratic Party to try to defeat the economic populist vision of somebody like Bernie Sanders. And it's pretty interesting that time after time after time, we see that people really like these ideas that Bernie Sanders put forward. And the Democrats have for a decade, for nearly a decade now, right? I mean, we're at this point for nearly a decade, have just been trying to find a way to put the genie back in the bottle and constantly rebrand their very, very unmobilizing, unmotivating brand of politics that's basically around protecting the rich and the powerful from the pitchforks, as Obama said, after the financial crisis. I'm trying to find a way to rebrand it as somehow like revolutionary or interesting. Now they're just trying to pitch it as kind of common sense, homespun, get the elites out of politics. Cause the elites in America are very, very fixated, with getting everyday folks healthcare, right? I mean, it's a constant try to redefine their political message.
For instance, it's moderate to support Israel in a country that 77% of Democratic voters believe is conducting a genocide.
I mean, we got to get into this piece, but this is one of these things that's so funny about these folks. Remember, there's the abundance thing. There's now, I guess, just old school. We got to go back to moderation. There were the popularists. Remember those folks, Matt, who are just like, we basically got to look at the poll, and whatever the polls say, that's like what our position will be. It is always interesting which things that they don't want to cross the line on, namely Israel, which is just like, its support is in the toilet, particularly with Democratic Party voters. But we can go through this piece a little bit and see about these big ideas. American politics today can seem to be dominated by extremes. President Trump is carrying out far-right policies while some of the country's highest-profile Democrats identify as democratic socialists. Moderation sometimes feels outdated. It is not. Candidates closer to the political center from both parties continue to fare better in most elections than those farther to the right or the left. This pattern may be the strongest one in electoral politics today, but it is one that many partisans try to obscure and many voters do not fully grasp. The evidence is vast. Republicans have frittered away winnable races in Alabama, New Hampshire, and elsewhere over the past decades by nominating extremist candidates, while Senator Susan Collins of Maine, a moderate Republican, is the only sitting senator who represents a state that reliably votes the other way in presidential elections. On the Democratic side, there are no progressives in the mold of AOC or Bernie Sanders, who represent a district in a swing district or state. I don't know if that's just a note here about state in the sense of Senate, but I can think of some.
Right. Must be statewide, they mean.
Yeah. Instead, the Democrats who win tough races work hard to signal to voters that they are less progressive than their party. Now, we can go down a little bit, and you can already guess who they're going to be celebrating. Ruben Gallego, Jackie Rosen, Tammy Baldwin, Jared Golden. Left-wing Democrats and right-wing Republicans have spent years trying to tell a different story. They claim that reaching out to swing voters is overrated and that the better strategy involves turning out the base by running pure ideological campaigns. They are wrong, but their argument does contain an element of truth. As the country has become more polarized and many voters cannot fathom crossing over to the other party, persuasion has become harder. It is not impossible, though, and it remains far more effective than pursuing the fantasy that America has a latent left-wing or right-wing majority waiting to be inspired and turned out. Now, we'll go forward a little bit.
I got to say something on that, and maybe put that down so it doesn't show the share screen over us the whole time. But the one thing that I do know about political science, which is not my main mode of analysis, I guess mainly, but is when it comes to the so-called persuasion thing, people seem to imagine there's like 5 guys in the middle of it, and you got to get 3 of them with your arguments, or over 2 of them. But really, what it is there's a whole mass of people that are usually going to vote one way or the other, and the thing you have to persuade them against is to go vote versus stay at home. That's really like when people talk about undecideds, most undecideds are still polarized toward one part or the other, if not indeed registered to vote in one primary and under one party ticket.
No, totally. And also, like, the largest majority when it comes to voters in America is non-voter, right? Because both of these parties have done a lot to kind of alienate folks. And, we'll get into the specific examples here, but I'm just going to warn everybody here. It's a pretty narrow for something that's supposed to be so definitively solved by this kind of cherry-picked evidence that the New York Times put forward. One thing that we saw from somebody like Bernie Sanders' campaign for president was that he surprisingly, unlike Hillary Clinton and others, was actually pretty good at convincing people from the other side. The problem is that the party wasn't interested in seeing that happen. And this is going to be something as we get into some of these swing states and swing districts, is that the party, the Democratic Party in particular, plays a big role in making sure that we never get to test the thesis or the argument that progressive politics can win in swing districts, because they put their thumb on the scale, either kind of clandestinely or very, very publicly, like sending, I don't know, somebody like Nancy Pelosi to South Texas to campaign for Henry Cuellar to prevent Jessica Cisneros, to take that seat. Which for people forget, I mean, she lost that vote by like dozens of votes. Dozens, like that, as small as it gets. So yeah, it does it does make a difference here. And I'll just read this unless you think I need to put it up every time, Matt. Mr. Trump's victory over Ms. Harris was telling. The moderation that has worked best in recent years is not a sober 20th century centrism that promised to protect the status quo. It is more combative and populist. It tends to be left of center on economics and right of center on social issues, with abortion being an exception. Quote, angry centrism is a very potent way to win, says Lakshya Jain, a founder of Split Ticket, a political data firm. Rather than locating itself midway between the two parties, this new centrism promises sweeping changes while criticizing the two parties are out of touch. Now,
Bill Clinton, Tony Blair.
Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, but also, Matt, the thing that they're going to keep on leaning on is this idea that like America is polarized between like far right racists on the Republican side and MAGA world and these crazy democratic socialists, right? Well, it seems like the kind of politics that have been pushed forward by the democratic socialist wing, is the one that you're talking about here when you're talking about, a movement that is very much focused on like economic, populist stuff. And, I remember a few months ago, a friend of the show, Benjamin Fong, wrote a phenomenal piece in Damage, called Towards a Socialist Minimalism, right? And the position was like, we should just do the Bernie Sanders thing, run on our winning issues and sort of say like, hey, we're not going to get involved in the kind of like Democrat Republican culture war of politics, right? And not having a kind of maximalist position where like there's a socialist take on like every single thing that gets brought up, like should George Strait replace Bad Bunny as the at the Super Bowl show or whatever, and just say like, hey, we're not going to swim in the fucking mud, which is just a pure distraction, from our kind of politics. This is something that like exists as a very strong tendency amongst like the democratic socialist left in this country. So it's very funny to kind of see this branded as a kind of like democratic socialist politics. Because at the end of the day, if they have to stand on their own 2 feet and take away the big weapon, which is economic populism, something, by the way, all of these motherfuckers have opposed since its entrance into the major stages of American politics, they wouldn't be standing on too much.
Yeah, who's not mentioned in this is Dan Osborne.
They do mention Dan Osborne.
Oh, do they? I thought I searched.
They do mention him later. We'll get to his bit in a second because they mention him in like opposition to Bernie Sanders, which is very funny to me. But let's get down to their big argument here. Despite Mr. Trump's rhetorical nods to the center, he is governing as a radical who rejects longstanding governing constraints and uses the power of the presidency to enrich his family. He threatens American democracy. The Democratic Party, as a result, has become the only party of the country's two major one that respects basic Republican traditions like the sanctity of elections and the constitutional system of checks and balances. Yet many Americans see the Democratic Party as too liberal, too judgmental, and too focused on cultural issues to be credible. And voters are moving away from it. Of the 30 states that track voter registration by political party, Democrats lost ground to Republicans in every single one of them between 2020 and 2024, and often by a lot. Perhaps more worrisome for Democrats, younger voters, non-white Americans, and immigrants, all growing parts of the electorate, have shifted from the party. By the way, this is all true, and these people, as this was going on, were cheerleading the forces responsible for it. Like, I just want to be like, the hindsight is 2020 here, friends. Like, this is crazy to be writing this way.
The economy is fine. Because, like, just to put my cards on the table, like, I think a lot of this stuff on social issues, it blows back and forth. And it is really influenced by the conditions of people in that moment. And I want to play this clip now of Chuck Todd. He was on with Shane Smith of Vice. And this is... Actually, it'd be nice if he was saying this on Meet the Press 10 years ago, but he's asked like what went wrong, and he's right here. Oh, let me zoom in here.
Smart people were saying, we saw the last Republican president, so they're going to be, because of the demographics, because everyone was young, they theoretically only vote Democratic, sort of eviscerated in the last election. What did the Democratic Party do wrong, which is a long list, but also why do you think they're having such a hard time building their bench?
So I'd go with, the infamous book by my friend Jake Tapper called Original Sin. The original sin to me does not start with Joe Biden. I look at the original sin as the incorrect analysis of why Obama won in 2012. This conventional wisdom got created, and I participated in it too, right? You looked at the numbers and you said, oh, wow. Look at this coalition Obama's put together of Latinos. They're starting to vote in numbers that look closer to the way African Americans vote for Democrats. Boy, is that lethal. You put those two things together with millennials, and you have an unbeatable coalition. So convinced were Democrats that this identity politics was the answer, that even the Republicans agreed. Obama didn't win on identity. Obama made Mitt Romney the guy you didn't like who fired your brother. Okay. He was the corporate stooge that, came in and brought in the consulting groups to clear out the factory that had supported your town, right? They made a class argument, Shane, an old-fashioned class warfare argument. The Democrats, messaging-wise, got trapped for a decade into believing identity politics was the answer to sustained success.
Now, how did that trap work? Because I very clearly still remember the 2012 election as the way he said it, which is Romney was painted as the consultant, like he said, clears out the factory,
Bain
the car
Capital.
elevator guy. Yeah, exactly. The 47% are takers. And somehow that message was lost in favor of one devoid of it and leaning into entirely identity politics. That was because of our capitalist press and the donors. And so when you'll see like someone like David Shore say, you actually, you know, on certain social issues, some of the donors are to the left of the American public. Well, that's what's happened after they take over politics for 10 plus years as the American dream has been killed by bankers and never resuscitated. There hasn't been a raising of the minimum wage since I was working at fucking McDonald's. It was signed under George W. Bush. George W. Bush. And guess what? There has been trifectas where Democrats have held the White House and Congress, and they have not passed another one. It is $725. Like, so like, how does this get missed? It's a conspiracy. It's not just, oh, some accident. Some pollsters were looking at demographics and got a little bit excited. That was that. I mean, I'm so fucking angry because that ruined democracy.
I think you're 100% right. And, you know, obviously throw in on top of that NAFTA, something that, you know, it does drive me crazy. And you do realize, sorry to be a broken record on this, the kind of bubble that a lot of media people are in. And frankly, unfortunately, a lot of people who spend a lot of time commenting and listening to left-wing podcasts as well, that they don't realize that all across the country for a very long time, particularly in rural America, people do talk about NAFTA. They did. And it's just like this idea that these guys were stupefied and weren't upset, you know, were just kind of like grasping for something to be angry about. No, the Democratic Party said, this is our brand. This is what we're about. And hell, before we have like the populist, right-wing populist monster Trump come into it, let's try to negotiate another one. Let's do another big S one. Remember TPP, right? Yep. So this is something that like did not just come out of nowhere. You're totally right to note that. And also the successes that they had in kind of counteracting this were by doing the opposite of the strategy that they then doubled, tripled, and quadrupled down under with this most recent loss.
How good does, as Trump basically destroys the American economy even further with insane tariffs, where he's saying, you know, Canada can't sell us lumber because they're doing fentanyl across the border. How bad does it look that Obama spent the last year of his presidency trying to get fast track authority from the Senate so that the executive could do trade deals? That was the big push. Totally. Is Obama, the Senate shouldn't be in charge of these trade deals, and it should be the executive. Well, here we are.
And frankly, now there has been this kind of like mass amnesia program going on where Democrats kind of act like as if they weren't gung-ho on this shit. I mean, for years, even in the beginning of Trump, you know, people were still coming after Bernie Sanders for him correctly pointing out how damaging it was that they supported this stuff. But let's give them their due. Here's their little charts here. I will put this up just because it is visual. This is from the New York Times, and they're noting here that in this area, in the swing districts, that is where the wins have been. Now, again, you know, I do think that it's worth noting that this is like a particular sliver, but it shouldn't be too surprising. So these are the districts that were won in Trump country and the districts that Republicans won in Harris country. They're all moderates, according to this group here. And now I want to get into two things. One is the party structural thing, and then two, we can get into the definition of moderate. One is what we talked about before with Henry Cuellar, who I think is probably the perfect example of this. They don't let people with our kind of politics win competitive primaries in the Democratic Party. And in fact, they're so against it, particularly in those districts, in those kind of swing districts, that they will put their finger on the scale to prevent it from happening. So this isn't something like,
Pelosi, right?
we keep on running these radicals in swing districts and they keep on losing. No, you don't allow it to happen because you're afraid of what might happen if they start doing that. It would be very bad for the party if it turns out the thing holding them back has been their kind of resistance to the common sense pro-working class politics represented by the Democratic Socialist wing. Secondly, and this is the thing that I think is kind of interesting, is their definition of what a moderate is. Because look, I'm not denying reality here. There are like conservative Democrats who have won parts of the country that are Republican, vice versa. I don't think that's impossible, right?
Yeah.
But they are saying that this is a kind of data-driven argument that is proving that this is the way that things are. We have here. Let me bring this up. Moderates outperformed. And it just shows which ones outperformed Harris and which ones did not. Moderates outperformed Harris by 2.8%, and Republican moderates outperformed Trump by 2.9%. Now, that's interesting, right? What does that mean? Well, it turns out that the definition of moderate here that they're using has some issues. Because we know who this is against, right? Who are the radicals in the Democratic Party, Matt? Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Bernie Sanders, AOC. All people who, represent the strong wing of the Democratic Party, people who are very much embraced by the party, put into positions of leadership, all that, right? That's why they lost. No, obviously, these are people who are constantly attacked by the Democrats. The data that they used for their chart, the researchers making the claim that ideology can have little connection to voter perceptions. It includes, quote, academic measures that encompass thousands of obscure congressional votes and campaign donations. The data ends up being so messy as to produce bizarre results. We'll get to those in just a second, but I really want to set this up clearly for the listener here. All of our argument is based upon this, right? We are saying we have the data to prove this particular kind of politics is the winner. So we should probably pay attention to the people who score well on this, right, Matt? According to their own logic. The data ends up being so messy as to produce bizarre results. The measure rates Representatives Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, two progressive heroes, as more centrist than consciously moderate Warnock. Another index judges Miss Ocasio-Cortez to be less progressive than Representative Richie Torres, whose positions on immigration and Israel anger the left. That these measures suggest ideology is unimportant says more about them than about political reality. The picture is that moderate candidates fare a few percentage points better on average than otherwise similar candidates. The gap grows when comparing moderates with progressive Democrats or right-wing Republicans. In today's divided America, even a few percentage points can be the difference between victory and defeat. So, okay, after all of this investigation that we've got from them, we basically end up kind of where we started. That, like, there are some things that are very popular in America, and there are some things that are not popular in America. The things that are not popular in America are the Democratic Party, identity politics, and things that are popular is when people talk about working class issues. And this is something that I have this DSA Jackman poll I can pull up, jump in here, Matt. I mean, it is truly amazing to sit here and we make this whole argument, and then we're like, well, yeah, but it also shows that the people who we're saying are kind of responsible for the failures of this party, people who, by the way, we've pushed this outskirts and have no influence, are constantly ridiculed and attacked by the leadership of this party, they actually do well on this metric that we say is the secret sauce for winning elections.
I just can't, I can't get over, I thought the first time I read that paragraph about the index that judges AOC to be less progressive than Richie Torres, I thought I must have been missing something. How does that not invalidate this entire argument? Like, what are they even talking about? I mean, it's very clearly like you are not approaching this with the correct tool or frame of analysis. If you're getting that, like, I don't even know how that happens.
It's because I think, because again, I'm not going to sit here and say that like, there isn't value in like there isn't like, I think all's fair and like war and politics, right? I'm an advocate for my side and my vision of the world, right? Like there are things that you could do that could win an election that aren't socialist, for example, like that's, of course, right? What they are trying to do here, though, is to say we have like a neutral kind of, science evidence-based position. And what they're afraid of reckoning with is the fundamental reality that, yeah, most Americans are sick and tired of partisan politics. And what they like is when people talk about working class issues and engage in economic populism and don't engage in like hyper identity politics stuff that has just alienated everybody, right? But because they want to kind of define away the Sanders, the AOC, the Tlaib, the Omars, they have to try to say like, oh, this is just a strange anomaly that people associate the folks who are always talking about working class issues with with these kind of politics. And, I think it shows something that we've known for a long time is that like the strategy of and this has been the playbook honestly since the Kamala loss, right, Matt? Is trying to blame the left somehow for their loss, try to redefine them as the ones who are actually wanting to talk about like the real serious issues, when in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. We saw that with that poll that we've covered on this show from Jackman and DSA, from the Center for Working Class Politics that showed, guess what? Economic populism is wildly popular in the country. Democratic socialism is something that is becoming more and more mainstream in the average American voter's mind. And the politics and policies that we've put forward, people like. Guess what they don't like? And DSA and Jackman poll found this as well. They don't like the identity politics stuff. They don't like hey, this person is going to represent this entire group, so their success is like your success. People really don't like that kind of stuff. And they don't want to reckon with that because it completely invalidates their entire political project, and their timidness in just saying what it is that they believe. Because what they should say is that like, we don't want to live in a country governed by economic populists. We don't want to live in a country that treats everyday working class people as worthy of making judgment in the same way as us in our wonderful room, as the New York Times editorial board. And they have to come up with this kind of nonsense, I think, to kind of divide things. They pit Dan Osborne against Bernie Sanders later.
Yeah. I'm looking at this, and actually the Osborne angle and the Bernie Sanders thing, where people will say Kamala outperformed Bernie Sanders, are sort of the same issue, which is that they were both dragged down by the Democratic Party and did what, and Dan Osborne was able to distance himself. If you go to the Free Beacon, the right-wing rag, it goes into Dan Osborne's ad where he says, I'll help build the wall. That's down the stretch of the campaign in October, when it was clear that Kamala, I think it was becoming clear to folks, not to me, unfortunately, that Harris was fucked and gonna lose probably pretty big. So Dan Osborne, de-emphasizes the part where he says some immigrants should get Social Security cards and that sort of stuff, and leans into the fucking headwinds that he sees because that's the weather created by this Democratic Party. The same with Bernie. He's traveling all over the fucking country trying to get Kamala Harris's balloon to float, and it never did. So, okay, he wasn't in Vermont campaigning trying to get out the vote because he knew he had that sewed up.
And I'm sorry, I think it's just absurd to compare the Sanders Senate race and Harris. But if we're going to do that, right, I'll take your one for our AOC outperforming Kamala Harris. I'll be even more delighted to be able to pick up our Rashida Tlaib weight outperforming Kamala Harris and her pro mass slaughter campaign. So if they want to play that game, the playbook is clear. And look, just fucking embrace it, friends. You either have to deny reality, right, and say that working class politics and working class messaging aren't popular in this country, which, You know, they've already had to come out and say it is, but they had to redefine it as somehow conservative, right? And that's basically the double move of this kind of piece. Hey, we have them on their back foot. Let's make them either embrace the kind of politics that are winners or come out and finally say that they just don't want to win if that means that you get good shit.
A fun detail, you know, the independent Dan Osborne, a detail that I thought was maybe concealed, but is included in this Free Beacon story in the last paragraph. Early on in his campaign, Osborne retained the consulting firm Bread and Roses, which shares a name with the Democratic Socialists of America caucus.
That's actually very funny. But anyway, you know, new ideas for the New York Times. Pinch me when it actually happens.
Hey, look, you want to have socialist advised independence, New York Times?
Yeah.
Be my guest, buddy.
Go for it. Go for it. Well, folks, I hope you all enjoyed our deep dive into this. As always, we appreciate you so much and the support that y'all give us in this program. We got some big things coming. We're really looking forward to announcing. We will be able to announce by first week of November. So you'll hear it from us first, of course. But until then, friends, take care. Have a good rest of the week. And cancel your subscription to the fucking filthy rag at this point and support Jacobin. All right, friends. We'll see you later.
Peace.